Ecuador's independent media condemned the government's attempts to silence them during last week's nationwide protests. New economic measures to be implemented in Cuba. And the U.S. sends diplomats to Turkey to persuade Ankara to stop its operation in Syria. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Doris Polo. Independent media in Ecuador have condemned the government's attempt to silence and criminalize their coverage of last week's huge protests. A diverse platform of alternative outlets say they were able to break the mainstream media's silence on the repression by the police. It says their coverage from the scene is entirely verifiable, but that several of their members suffered censorship and police raids. They supported the demands for the Interior and Defense ministers to be sacked. Following the defeat of the Ecuadorian government's austerity decree, the International Monetary Fund says it will continue to work with the country. On Twitter, the IMF said it firmly supported President Lenin Moreno's efforts to reach an agreement that protects the most vulnerable, and that it would work closely with his government to find the best way of ensuring what it called fiscal sustainability. In February, President Moreno agreed a $4.2 billion bailout agreement with the fund. Lifting fuel subsidies and other austerity reforms were part of that deal.
We very much welcome that there is an attempt to bring in all the stakeholders and to make decisions about macro reforms, taking into account the various communities that are going to be affected by it. So quite simply, we stand ready, we stand in support of the authorities. These are challenging times, and we would like to see that the reforms get done and that they are successful.
The Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has congratulated the Ecuadorian people for what he called a great victory over the IMF. He said it was ridiculous to think that their huge protests could have been organized by Venezuela.
The people of Ecuador, like the people of Venezuela, said no to the International Monetary Fund. And the people of Ecuador had a great victory against the International Monetary Fund. They twisted the arm of the International Monetary Fund. They say that Maduro directed the protests in Ecuador. It's ridiculous to say that. It was not Maduro. It was the people of Ecuador, the indigenous movements, the campesino movements, the youth. The struggle and the victory belong to the people of Ecuador.
In Bolivia, campaigning for Sunday's presidential election is coming to a close. President Evo Morales is holding his final rallies in Cochabamba and later in El Alto. On Tuesday night, the main candidates closed their campaigns in Santa Cruz. At a big rally with his mass party, President Evo Morales called for calm and unity in the face of attempts by violent sections of the opposition to undermine the election. He said the large turnout reflected the true desires of the people in the eastern city. Now, small groups of opposition supporters tried to disrupt the ruling party's rally, but they were dispersed by the police. The opposition has threatened not to recognize any victory by President Morales and has called for the National Electoral Court to be replaced.
Santa Cruz, su pueblo pacífico.
The people of Santa Cruz are peaceful. Those who try to incite violence are attacking democracy, not party. The people of the world are seeing where this violence is coming from small groups. Brothers and sisters, whilst we're united, we will keep on defeating those people who don't love the people of Bolivia.
The main opposition candidate, Carlos Mesa, also held a closing rally in Santa Cruz. The opposition is running around 10 points behind President Morales in the opinion polls, and it is divided among 8 different candidates. However, Mesa insisted he was confident of victory.
This strength that we have is to defend democracy. We are here to build democracy. We are doing it here, at front, to win the elections on October 20th. We are going to win.
More than 7 million people in Bolivia are eligible to vote, and electoral authorities say preparations are going according to schedule. Our correspondent, Freddy Morales in La Paz, has more.
Electoral campaign ends today. From midnight, all political campaigns is banned to give way to a period of electoral silence ahead of elections on Sunday. Bolivians will go to the polls to elect their Congress and their government for the next 5 years. President Evo Morales will end his campaign in the city of El Alto, some 15 kilometers away from La Paz. Carlos Mesa, who is in second place in the polls, will close his campaign in the country's interior. International observer missions have already arrived in Bolivia. 219 election observers will also oversee the voting process. And in the last hours, some 92 experts from the Organization of American States arrived in Bolivia and met with President Evo Morales.
That was our correspondent, Freddy Morales, with that report. Now, Argentina will hold its presidential election a week after Bolivia on October 27th. So what are the voters expecting? Our correspondent reports.
The loss of purchasing power, the need to create jobs, and the growth in poverty are some of the main economic issues that will be upmost in the minds of Argentinian voters when they cast their ballots at the end of the month.
I am worried that Macri might win again. I'm following it all. I see how things are in the streets. In fact, I work with a truck, and I see everything that is happening. And I am truly worried about Macri winning again.
The exchange rate, the economy, that is what worries me. The fact that my wage has dropped in dollars, if not in pesos.
Different opinion polls put Alberto Fernández in the lead of close to 20 points. Which means he could win in the first round.
It seems to me that after October 27th, more than anything, we have to regain hope that things can get better. The economic situation is very complicated, and it won't change overnight after the election. We have to rebuild many public policies that have been abandoned and create new ones. For example, we practically don't have a health ministry. How can we think that our country will improve and move forward while we are cutting back the state so that it cannot attain to the public?
Regards the whole electoral process with skepticism, anti-Kirchnerism is one of the main arguments of who will opt again for Mauricio Macri.
I don't believe in the opposition. I prefer the ill we know with the current administration, because at least it's transparent and there is no corruption.
I really believe that Mauricio Macri will do what he needs to do. I don't want the prisoners to come back, because I want a better future for this country.
One opinion poll indicates that 69% of voters, whatever their own preference, believe that Alberto Fernández will win. We'll have to wait until October 27 to see if that is confirmed.
Shifting gears now, after several weeks without appearing in front of the media, this Tuesday, Haitian President Jovenel Moïse launched a new call for dialogue to resolve the country's crisis. Moïse called on the opposition to accept talks with his government. Haiti is now in its 5th consecutive week of anti-government demonstrations led by opposition sectors, who say they will not stop protesting until President Moïse resigns. At least 20 people have died and more than 200 have been injured during the upheaval, while commerce and basic services are paralyzed. The government has appointed a commission for national dialogue, but it has been rejected. The demonstrators consider Moïse incapable of solving the nation's problems and accuse his government of corruption. Meanwhile, the United Nations officially closed its peacekeeping mission in Haiti on Tuesday, 2 years after Brazil withdrew its military contingent, which had led the mission for most of its 15 years in the country. The head of the UN Blue Helmets, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, said the current context is not ideal for the end of 15 years of peacekeeping operations in the country. The peacekeeping mission will be replaced by a civilian political mission. Coming up, Jamaica's former Prime Minister is undergoing surgery. We'll tell you why after the break. Welcome back. Jamaica's former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson is scheduled to undergo surgery this Wednesday after he fractured his right knee and hip. This follows a crash near his St. Andrew home on Monday evening. The 84-year-old was rushed to the Tony Thwaites wing of the University Hospital of the West Indies following the incident and was evaluated overnight by a medical team. A spokesperson for Patterson said he is expected to make a full recovery with the appropriate medical treatment.
Therefore, something.
The Cuban Vice President Salvador Valdez Mesa has announced new economic measures to be implemented on the island. In the face of the U.S. economic blockade on the Caribbean nation, the Cuban government has taken the decision to launch a series of economic measures to be implemented in commerce. In addition, certain tariff exemptions will be granted to importers of raw material, providing they are used for the development of domestic production.
The Council of Ministers approved a set of measures to organize the import and arrival of goods for non-profit or commercial purposes and to propose measures to address the complex problems identified in the evaluation we are carrying out. One of the objectives of the measures will be to strengthen domestic industry by objectively using the capabilities that we have, the financing provided for the plan of our economy, and other alternatives that facilitate national production through relations with external suppliers who give us the possibility of financing and contribute towards our industry productive cycle.
The Vice President also explained that a system of bonuses will be implemented for those who import raw materials into the country.
Tariff subsidies or sections on imports of raw materials and inputs, prioritizing those destined to national production and the most necessary products for the population, imported by chains of shops and other commercial entities, which will reduce costs with the aim of reducing retail prices when sold to the population.
The Peruvian National Police prevented the progress of the March for the Day of Rural Women in Lima. The demonstration's purpose was to reach downtown Lima, where they hoped to meet with various national authorities. However, the march was halted by a police cordon that stopped its progress, despite the fact that the citizens were peacefully demonstrating and not interrupting the flow of traffic. Also, some women reported being abused by security forces while trying to head to the city center.
The other point that we are presenting in this proposal seeks to address the issues of violence, because there is a lot of violence. There are a lot of femicide in rural areas and within indigenous communities, which are not often noticed. There are women who are burned in their communities, and this is not known.
In other news, South Africa's electricity company Eskom has apologized for the latest round of power cuts after supply to several parts of the country was disrupted throughout the day on Wednesday. In a statement, Eskom said its ability to generate power had been hit by maintenance problems. However, the utility company has a history of implementing scheduled blackouts designed to prevent a total collapse of the overstretched electricity grid. This as a result of an increase in demand, rising costs, falling revenues, and crumbling infrastructure. 3 more people have been killed in Guinea as protests against proposed changes to the country's constitution continue. Among those killed are 7 civilians and 1 police officer. The protests come after opposition parties and civil society groups called for nationwide protests against plans by the government to amend the constitution. Opposition groups say the move is an attempt to allow President Alpha Condé to run for a third term in office.
There is no point in losing one citizen, two citizens. It is a huge loss for the nation, because no Guinean blood should not be shed in a context of clashes. Dialogue, words can find a solution.
The United States has sent its top officials, including Vice President Mike Pence, to Turkey to persuade Ankara to stop its operation in northern Syria. This comes after Turkey dismissed sanctions imposed by the Trump administration as illegal and vowed to press on with its operation in Syria. Pence is expected to be accompanied by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. Meanwhile, the Turkish military has continued to strengthen fighting near its border with Syria. And Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan now says he will meet the U.S. Vice President when he arrives in the capital Ankara on Thursday. Earlier he said he wouldn't, and that he would only talk to President Donald Trump about Turkey's military offensive in northeast Syria. Erdogan said he will decide whether to meet Trump next month after the meetings with Pence and his delegation.
The trip to the U.S. will be evaluated after talks with the delegations that will come here because the arguments, debates, conversations being held in Congress regarding myself, my family, and my minister friends are a very big disrespect to Turkey. For the moment, I am not meeting anyone other than Pence and Pompeo.
And tensions remain high as the strategic border town of Kobani at the Syrian border might be exposed to clashes. According to reports, Russian and Syrian government forces have moved towards its outskirts, and Turkish forces were also moving towards the town. Soldiers carrying the Syrian flag were seen gathering around buses and military vehicles on a road believed to connect Kobani and Man Beach.
Our mission is to protect our land from the Turkish occupier. Right now in Ain al-Arabi, we came to this area to stand with the residents, to protect the women, the children, the men and everyone from the Turkish criminals, who have no humanity, no morals, nothing.
And as Turkey is stepping up on its offensive in the Syrian border region, hundreds of people fleeing the fighting have arrived at a refugee camp in Iraq. Syrian elderly people, children and women were among the people arriving at a camp in Bardarash, a town in Iraq's Kurdish region. According to the United Nations, about 160,000 people have fled their homes as fighting continues.
We fled war, bombs and bombardment. We want peace. We got out for the sake of those children. For the first time, we left our homes. Thank God the youth here welcomed us and received us well.
Shifting gears, Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam has condemned the United States Congress for passing 3 pieces of legislation related to the months of protests.
When you are saying that foreign governments want to sanction Hong Kong officials, there is no justification. I would like to express extreme regret that the U.S. House of Representatives approved the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act this morning. A foreign government or a foreign parliament is meddling in Hong Kong's internal affair. We don't need a foreign parliament to tell us how important Hong Kong's human rights, freedom, and judiciary are, because these are the core values of Hong Kong, and every Hong Kong person will strive to uphold them.
In the United States, more than a dozen people from human rights organizations and religious groups were arrested on Capitol Hill on Tuesday as they protested the Trump administration's refugee policy. Ann Richards, the former Assistant Secretary of State for Population, Refugees and Migration from 2012 to 2017, was among those arrested. The U.S. Supreme Court recently granted a request by President Donald Trump's administration to fully enforce a new rule that would curtail asylum applications by immigrants at the U.S.-Mexico border, a key element of his hardline immigration policies. The court said the rule, which requires most immigrants who want asylum to first seek safe haven in a third country through which they traveled on their way to the United States, could go into effect as litigation challenging its legality continues.
The United States can encourage other countries to keep their doors open and allow refugees to work and refugee children to go to school. That's key to mitigating conflict, restoring dignity to those who fled, and ensuring a future for millions of young people.
We'll take a short break now. When we come back, protests in Catalonia continue for the third day despite violent police repression. Don't touch that remote. Welcome back. Thousands of demonstrators have once again filled the streets on the third day of protests over the jailing of 9 separatist leaders for their role in a failed 2017 independence bid. The pro-independence protesters are marching from Girona to Barcelona. Scores of people have been hurt and dozens arrested as police violently repressed protesters in Barcelona and other Catalan cities since demonstrations began. Late on Tuesday, police charged at hundreds of demonstrators who retaliated by hurling projectiles and setting fire to rubbish bins and cardboard boxes. Our correspondent Joan Ortiz is at the protest in Barcelona and has the latest.
Behind me is the University of Barcelona, near where protesters are blocking a main road. This is just one of the many roadblocks across Barcelona and around Catalonia. As demonstrations enter the third day, there are reports that police were deployed to disperse crowds of protesters who had blocked main thoroughfares. But as soon as police dismantle one blockade, protesters form a human barricade elsewhere, further polarizing the region. Protesters from all parts of Catalonia are marching towards Barcelona, where they are expected to converge on Friday to stage a massive demonstration. Meanwhile, the Spanish government is yet to respond to the heavy police repression against protesters that happened on Tuesday night.
The Qatar government has announced new measures to end its controversial migrant worker restrictions. The country's labor minister, Yusuf Mohammed Fakhru, said Qatar plans to scrap controversial rules that require some workers to obtain permits to leave the country and block certain employees from changing companies without employers' permission. Human rights groups have said the previous system fueled abuses against migrants. Qatar wants to implement the reforms before it hosts the Soccer World Cup in 2022.
The cabinet has adopted new legislation related to a new law of minimum wage and also a new regulation to facilitate labor transfer to a new employer during the contracting period to preserve the rights of both parties, as well as a draft law to abolish exit permits and its application on the entities that are not subject to the provisions of the Qatari labor law.
A man digging a grave for his own daughter in India has found a newborn girl buried alive in the latest case of female infanticide, still common in the country. Hitesh Sirohi was about to bury his own daughter, who died a few minutes after birth, when his spade hit a pot that contained a newborn girl. The baby was taken to a hospital where she is receiving medical care. India has long struggled with female infanticide as parents prefer sons who are viewed as investments and heirs, while girls are seen as a liability. A 2011 study found that up to 12 million girls had been aborted in the last 30 years in India.
The baby must have remained buried from 2.5 to 3 days because she was very emaciated from her cheeks to her neck, her stomach and legs.
In Philippines, an earthquake of magnitude 6.4 struck central Mindanao on Wednesday, sending residents out of buildings and offices. Hundreds of people were seen rushing out of a shopping mall, and patients were forced to flee a hospital as the tremors struck. According to authorities, there were no immediate reports of casualties. Police in Papua New Guinea have issued an arrest warrant for former Prime Minister Peter O'Neill on suspicion of official corruption. Acting Police Commissioner David Manning said the warrant was issued after investigators found overwhelming evidence of corruption during the time O'Neill served as Prime Minister. Manning could not, however, provide details on the alleged corruption. O'Neill denies any wrongdoing. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.